Hello and welcome to That Nerd Thing, where we uncover the magical impact that fandoms have on our lives. I'm Morgan, and today I am meeting with another podcaster, Rachel, the host of the Menuscript Podcast. And this is a podcast all about, I love your tagline, by the way, amazing books and tasty food. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Hi, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be joining you today.
Yeah, and your podcast sounds so cool. Can you tell listeners a little bit more, what it's about?
Sure. So two of my favorite things are books and food. And once I started getting really into cooking, which I'd probably date around the pandemic / when I moved out and lived on my own and, had to cook for myself, I started just taking pictures on Snapchat of the food I was making. Every now and then I'd post it. And because I'm always reading, there'd be a book too, usually in the picture. And eventually, instead of just putting it all on my regular Instagram, created my book account, which was the Menuscript, and decided to call it Menu with kind of the tie into books and then, like a bit of a play on words. I throw in a lot of puns. I think they're great. Other people probably roll their eyes. And so I would just share, whatever book I was reading, some thoughts about it, and then the meal. And I started listening to more podcasts, and I was always talking about my books. Like everyone who has had conversations with me frequently hears, so in this book I'm reading, and they're like, oh, here we go again. I don't know, someone said, maybe you should make your own book podcast. And I was like, no way, I can't do that. But then I would think about it a little bit more and like, oh, this sounds really fun. And then kind of seeing and hearing how much fun other people on podcasts that I listen to seem to be having. Like I love Mugglecast and like the Fantasy Fangirls, which actually that's how I found your podcast, through people.
Oh, cool.
On that, like they had tagged you in it or something like that. And so I was like, well, they seem to be having fun. And I also was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it because I love talking about books. And I frequently say like one of my toxic traits is reading books that none of my friends have read. So I have no one to talk about them with. So I was like, well, I'll just talk about the books. And anyway, so sorry. That was more the backstory of how I made.
Oh, no, I love that. I was going to ask that anyways.
So now what the podcast actually is, in each episode, it's either called an appetizer, where I pick one book and give a little summary, avoiding as many spoilers as I can. I talk about some major themes or takeaways, maybe why I picked up the book in the first place, some lines that stood out to me, which I call my chef's kiss quotes, some recommendations, maybe that would be similar, and then a meal. And sometimes the meal is inspired by the book. Like I don't know if you read Funny Story by Emily Henry, but like they go to that asparagus farm. So the meal I shared when I covered that, what involved asparagus. Sometimes it's just something, kind of random or goofy, but in some way connected to the story. Oh, and I also talk about if there's a TV show or film adaptation, how I thought it compared to the book, or if there isn't one, who I would want to cast in it.
Wow.
And then the other type of episode I haven't done as many of these. I call those Dish It Out. And that's when I pick an author and talk about like all of their books at once. And so that's been really fun too. So I did do one episode specifically on Funny Story by Emily Henry, but then I had a different, more general Emily Henry episode to cover, like her other books.
That sounds amazing. That's such a cool idea for a podcast. And that sounds very unique. And I love the name. Very clever.
Thank you. It's been really fun. I started it in like late March, early April, just of this year. And have loved putting the episodes together and recording and releasing them and getting the feedback from mostly my family and friends who listen. But like I said, I'm not doing it to try to, turn it into my career or a living. It's just been a really fun hobby and way to branch out. And, my therapist was thrilled that I started doing this, to put myself out there a little bit more and speak about something that I love. Because at the end of the day, it's really just me sharing about stuff that I'm passionate about.
I love that. So are you comfortable sharing like what you do for your day job?
Yeah, sure. So I was a middle and high school math teacher for 5 years. And then I transitioned out of that to work in education research. So I'm still in
Oh.
the education realm. But what I do now for my company is we're contracted sometimes by school districts, sometimes it's a state department. We have some federally funded projects to just consult on whatever question or issue the school is working with. So we've done some stuff with teacher retention, literacy rates and test scores are big, things like attendance. We've done some professional development for teachers. And it really, like, I took an education policy course in undergrad. And that was when I knew, like, eventually I want to leave the classroom and work within education on a scale where I can be a part of something that's making changes for everybody, not just the students who are in my classroom. So it's great. I really love it. So speaking about things
so
I can nerd out about is definitely that. But
do you ever wonder if some of your students from the past will find your podcast?
I have wondered that. It would be funny. And then I still live in the same town, so I see them around from time to time, and it's always really exciting. Fun fact, actually, I'm a huge NFL fan, and a former student of mine got drafted this past year. So he's on the Jets, which is unfortunate because that's my least favorite team. But I can cheer for him. So
yeah.
But yes, if any of them ever did find the podcast, I'd be very excited. And books were definitely something I would connect with students about. When I taught in the high school, a lot of girls were holding Colleen Hoover books, and so I would get to say, like, oh, which of hers is your favorite, or is there one you'd recommend? And that was always great. Or yeah, just a fun way to connect with the kids outside of math, because they didn't always like to nerd out about math as much as I.
Are you ready to jump into your nerdy identity?
I would love to.
Awesome. What is the first thing that you were nerdy about?
So I had to kind of think about this. I know I just mentioned football. My dad started bringing me to Giants preseason games as a little kid. So I definitely always nerded out about that. But I also wasn't sure if, like, sports can be nerdy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
To, like, especially if you think of, like, jocks versus nerds stereotypes, those clash. But probably the much bigger thing I was nerdy about that I've realized has bled into so many areas of my life is horses. Love them.
Oh.
And, I would, as a kid, I would read any book that had a horse on the cover, which led to some extreme disappointment if the book wasn't actually really about horses and it just happened to have a horse on the cover. I collected and played with all sorts of model horses, like the Schleichs and then the Breyers, which actually I've got a few with me in my apartment on top of the bookcase. Most of them are tucked in bins in my parents' attic. But like any toy store, I would always be like, Mom, can we go check and see if they have Breyers? And she'd be like, fine. And then there was actually a hardware store that had a ton of them. So I've never been so excited to go to a hardware store. Haven't been to a hardware store, since childhood, unless I really need to. But I was always so excited to go to this one just to see which ones they had and see if there was one I'd want to get. I did ride for several years too. And one of the things I did was the dressage riding, which really took off in, I think it would have been the 2020 Olympics when the videos of the horse moving to music went viral.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone was like, it's rave horse. And people were like, whoa, dressage is awesome. And then this year in the Olympics, Snoop Dogg even went to the equestrian events, and people everywhere were talking about it. And then, like, me and several other horse people are just so excited to see the sport getting what I feel is its just dues in terms of attention. So I sadly don't ride anymore, but definitely still, if someone asks what my favorite animal is, horses. Still, if I see a book with a horse on the cover, I'll at least pick it up and see what it's about. It always catches my eye. I think they're wonderful animals.
Cool. Yeah, horses are magnificent. What is your favorite nerdy thing?
Probably Harry Potter. I wore my herbology shirt for this reason. That was another thing that was always big in childhood. My dad read the series out loud to me, except for the 7th book, because you don't read out loud as quickly as other kids will read in print. And so the 6th one had been ruined for me by kids talking about it at school. And so over the summer when the 7th one came out, I was like, I'm sorry, I gotta read this. in hindsight, that probably crushed him because that was like an evening routine. He'd come in and that would be like my bedtime story, but I had to do it. And those books, like that series, it's like chicken soup for me. It's so comforting. I can always return to Harry Potter. I've read / listened to them enough times now that I can pick up any book and just kind of jump in anywhere and know what's going on. I love talking about it. I love returning to it as an adult. I mentioned earlier the MuggleCast podcast, which I got into when I started listening to podcasts. I was like, oh, let me see if there happens to be a Harry Potter podcast. There's podcasts for everything. So that's how I stumbled upon it. I've been listening to it regularly. And I kind of joke now that it was like my gateway podcast to so many other ones, like, again, the Fantasy Fangirls, Millennial. I don't know if I would say it led me to the Kelsey Brothers podcast, but because I was like into podcasts at that point, I started listening to that one. So that was a way like Harry Potter has bled into my life. But otherwise, yeah, over the summer, I was at the boardwalk in New Jersey, and there was a store selling lots of Squishmallows, and one was for Ravenclaw. So I was like, I need to buy this. I do not collect, or at that point had owned Squishmallows, but I saw it. I was like, this is something I have to have. I've got like a Harry Potter mug, lots of Harry Potter ornaments for the holidays, most of which I actually have up year round because they're with my books. But yes, that is definitely my nerdiest, probably my favorite nerdy thing.
I love that. I love how you say MuggleCast was like your gateway podcast, because same, absolute same. If it wasn't for MuggleCast, I don't think I would be listening to any podcasts.
Yeah, I probably would only still be listening to like news podcasts and not like fun ones.
What are you currently nerdy about?
So again, probably still with books. Fourth Wing last summer really rekindled my love of fantasy. And so then that led me to the A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I have been like recommending both those series to so many people. And then they've been recommending them. And it's actually been really cool, especially with A Court of Thorns and Roses. A girl I'd gone to college with had read and loved the series, recommended it to me years ago, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, put it on my list. So then last fall, when I started it, I sent her a text saying, hey, like, just letting you know, I read that first book and I really liked it. Prior to that, we'd maybe we exchanged birthday messages, a few other random texts here and there, maybe a phone call. But since reading the first book in that series, she and I have had, like, we text every day, and most of the time not even about that book or that series, just about life. And it really has re-sparked that friendship that, despite the fact that we live 1,000 miles away, that book really brought us together. So yeah, definitely currently nerding out about all things Fourth Wing, Court of Thorns and Roses. I read the Throne of Glass series recently, loved that too. And then I guess I would say I'm still a nerd about football, especially now that it's fall and the season has begun, although I've resigned myself that it's going to be a long season as a Giants fan, but that's okay.
I don't know anything about football except that Taylor Swift is Travis Kelce's girlfriend.
Hey, that is all you need to know. I do love them.
What is the most underrated nerdy thing about you?
So I love puzzles, like the 1,000.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Jigsaw puzzles. It's just something great that I can do while I'm watching a movie or a game, or sometimes just silence even. It's so fun for me to like dig through the box, find the right pieces, put them together. And then like I love the moment where you start to see the image forming, and instead of all these little disjointed pieces, you can really see like, oh, cool. So it's really fun for me. Also, my knowledge of Disney, just like facts and lyrics, someday it's going to come in handy. Every now and then I'm at trivia and there's a Disney category. I'm like, yes, finally. But yeah, really, unless I'm with kids, it doesn't come up often. But I feel like it's something I know a lot about. I wish I could share this more, but there's very few opportunities to do so.
Which Disney movie do you think has the best soundtrack?
Oh, man, that's hard.
No pressure.
Honestly, I love The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Oh.
That soundtrack is so good. God Help the Outcasts, and the villain song is amazing. The whole opening number with the bells of Notre Dame, I love it. But I also I love the Mulan songs. Just Can't Wait to Be King. You can't go wrong with that. Of the newer Disney movies, so those are all kind of the I guess like the 90s era. I really did love it. The Encanto soundtrack. What's the song? Pressure.
Oh, yeah.
That was like my anthem for a solid month. Yeah, I love that one. And I do love Idina Menzel. I love theater in general. So like I've been listening to Idina sing ever since my parents would play the Wicked soundtrack for us in the car. So yeah, that one too. It's so hard to pick just one. What is your favorite?
Hercules.
Oh my God, how could I forget Hercules? That one's so good. Yes.
I love it. I love that movie. I feel like that's when Disney was kind of, I don't know, but it's one of those Disney movies that also has adult like hints to it, you know? So I love it. I love Hercules.
It's so good.
Yeah. What is the most random nerdy thing about you?
Okay. So this one I was like, do I want to share this on a podcast?
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I probably do. So again, this kind of goes back to the horses and how they've affected me. At my high school, in junior year US history, everyone has to write a thesis paper, and it can be on any topic you want, as long as it's US history related. And so 16, 17-year-old Rachel was like, all right, this is going to be about horses. And what I ended up writing about was the transition from the horse and buggy to the automobile in urban America at like turn of the century. It was so interesting, like so many issues that I never would have thought of. Like a lot of these horses were not well cared for, not in great shape. They would die in the middle of the road. Now you've got a dead horse attached to a cart, and then the sound of the hooves like clopping on the cobblestones, that's not featured in Bridgerton. It all looks so quaint and wonderful. You don't hear the clip, clop, clip, clop. But yeah, so that was like, wow, this is amazing. And then fast forward 10 years, I'm completing my master's in data analytics and public policy. And we had to pick a city/topic to like propose a policy for. And again, I was still kind of thinking education related, and I'd come across a statistic about the number of accidents that occur for kids en route to school. And actually between like 2012 and 2021, there were over 1,000 fatalities that occurred in hours that kids would be going to school. And then the number of just injuries and incidents is significantly higher than that. So I started focusing on safe routes to school, which then turned into just general transportation around the city, looking at like what would it take to get a bike lane in this road, or like fixing these sidewalks, or where should we put crosswalks or traffic signs. And so just like urban transportation is something I get so nerdy about and fascinated by. I recently heard of a book called like Paved Paradise, which is all about how like parking controls the world. And I cannot wait to read it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's just like, who knew? But yes, so that is my most random thing that I feel like unless someone else is an urban designer, it just doesn't come up that often. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's so interesting. And it's interesting hearing like where that first started and like how horses, the first nerdy thing, led to something so significant in your life. Like that's super cool.
Yeah, it was, you never know sometimes what brings you, what gets you there.
Yeah. What has your like journey into nerdiness been like for you?
Not always easy. You know, I was, like I said, with the horses, I had a couple other friends in elementary school who also loved horses. But then a lot of people really made fun of us for loving horses and for like smelling bad if we came from the barn, which I also like never went from the barn to elementary school because that would be a weird transition in my day. But like we were really picked on. And then with football, I've been doubted and questioned a lot, I think, for being a girl. There have been times where people be like, oh, name as many football players as you can. Or, oh, like what's a touchdown then? And it's like they're trying to trick me or say like, oh, you're not really a football fan.
That's awful.
Which, yeah, like at the time I was like, this is weird. But now looking back, I'm like, no, that was really sad. Like, was it a problem for me to say that I liked football or liked horses? Harry Potter, I had a little more leeway with. I never got picked on for being a Potterhead, at least, or if I did, I just blurted out with all the other teasing. But a lot of kids, especially when I was in elementary school, like at that point, the first several books were already out, like the 6th and 7th ones were coming out. So it had a pretty established base, and lots of kids were reading it, like teachers even were talking about it. And so it wasn't like as uncool, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it became more mainstream.
Yeah. But no, there were definitely times where things I would get very excited about, I wouldn't really talk about being excited about those things. Like again, with the puzzles, I wouldn't really share that I do
Right.
a lot of puzzles, or I wouldn't walk around like singing Disney songs. I still wouldn't do that. That'd be kind of weird. But
no, it wouldn't. I'd love that.
and yeah, but then there were also parts of the journey that were really exciting, like going to Disney World, seeing that stuff come to life, or the first time I got to go to Universal and see Harry Potter World. And I mean, they had lots of other stuff of fandoms that I loved too, but yeah, like seeing the castle and everything come to life along with other friends who also liked Harry Potter was a really cool like step in that journey.
That's so funny. You remind me when you bring up the castle and seeing it. I have a video from when it first opened. I don't remember when it first opened, but I know I first went there. I think it was in 2010. I think it was pretty close to probably when it opened, but there's a video of me reacting to walking in that my family took of me at the time. And I'm like crying, and I'm like getting irritable with them when they're trying to get me to like look at something. I'm like, I'm looking. I'm just like, oh gosh, maybe one day when I'm not shy, I'll make it public.
Oh yes, that would be great. First reaction video. Forget first look at the wedding. This is your first look at Hogwarts.
Oh yeah, those are the videos we need. There's so much teasing going on. Being nerdy wasn't cool for so long. People had a hard time embracing all of that. So then what is it like for you now that you have like this Instagram and this podcast where you talk about things that you love?
It's been really liberating, honestly, to like release that fear of being teased. And I found this huge community, mostly online, but also around just where I live, of people who also love these books and these things. And I went to an equestrian camp, so I was always able to share my love of horses with fellow campers and counselors. We were all there for a reason. But then now as an adult, like again, like following other book accounts on Instagram, and I think just not being afraid to reach out and send messages to people or comment on their posts of like, oh, this book's on my list, like what did you think? Or hey, I really loved this. And part of it I think was me, and this again like came from quite a bit of talk with a counselor of like if you do share something that you love, or you try to engage with someone on something that you love and they pick on you for it, or just kind of brush it aside, not to sound mean, but like how much do you really want that person in your life if they're not going to accept the things that you love? And I mean, they don't have to read the books too, but they can, at least appreciate and respect your interest and excitement in those things. And so I think realizing that like I don't need universal approval, not even close. And so moving away from posting things to get likes or get validation, and instead posting and talking about things that I love has been really a really freeing step on the nerd journey.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. And I don't think any of what you said was mean at all. I think it's all just like healthy self-interest, putting yourself first in a healthy way and maintaining healthy relationships and not just trying to people please. I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
I totally understand though, like posting and wanting to get like the likes and the follows. That's something that personally going through the podcast journey, I just started the podcast this year. It's so easy to look at the numbers, not just of the listens of each episode, but look at the numbers of social media posts and comments, and feeling pressured to post every day for the algorithm. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to get caught up in that. And I have gotten caught up in that many times throughout the year. And it's just about like, reminding myself why I'm doing this. And I'm really glad that you're on the show today, because as I'm talking to you, I'm actually feeling that a lot. Like right now, like that reminder of the show is about just talking to other nerds about the things that they're nerdy about and their journey to get there. And I love how you said like being able to share all of that now is liberating, because like that's also what I want to do in this podcast, is just help people feel like they have that voice and they can share it with others. So thank you for saying all of that.
No, thank you for creating this platform. Like I said, listening to some of the other episodes that you've put out, I definitely got that vibe of you wanted to create a space for people to come and just talk about the things they love, which is why I decided to just be like, hey, let me send her a message and see what she says. Worst case, she says no, and then I'm not on the podcast, which would be the same situation as if I didn't send a message at all. But no, I certainly don't want to pretend that I'm always like above the algorithm or not focused on it. I do. And part of it, like I'm a data person. Like I'm curious how many listeners I'm getting, or I love the map where it shows like where like listeners are downloading episodes from. And most of them are not a surprise because I'm like, okay, I know people there. But every now and then there's one that shows up some really random location. I'm like, how did they even find this? Like I have one listener in Belgium.
Cool.
Unless someone I know has moved to Belgium, I don't think I know anyone in Belgium, but they have downloaded every episode. I'm like, cool.
Aww.
I hope they're enjoying it.
Your podcast, it's such a cool and unique concept. I think that's great. I mean, you could even like partner with book clubs that have a certain book.
I would love to.
I don't look at me. I'm like thinking of all these ideas for you, but I think it's so cool. So, oh man, I had a question that just left my head. Was there anything else that you wanted me to talk to you about, like with your journey or your podcast before we move on?
So I think I shared that, but I really do love everything you said too about what drove you to creating this. And I hope if you ever are feeling lost again or buried by the algorithm that, you continue to find your way back to why you started this, because your show is really great. Like I love hearing the conversations you have with people, and you've amassed so many like interesting guests on your show, which is really really cool.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, you're gonna make me cry.
That was not my goal,
but I'm always like so happy when I get other like guests on my show to cry, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now it's like the other way around, because I guess I'll get a little bit more vulnerable here now, because something I've been thinking about is I've been just feeling so much not burnout, but it's just been a lot to edit every week and make sure I have guests lined up and posting on social media. It's a lot of pressure. And so one of the things I've been thinking through is how can I change that next year so that it still feels fun and refreshing for me without giving up on what I was hoping to do. And so I have a few ideas on how I'm going to do that I'll share probably later this year. But I mean, it means a lot for you to say that now, because this is like the time where I'm really evaluating what I want to do with this podcast. So thank you.
No, I really meant it. So I hope whatever you decide to do, it takes you in a direction you're really happy with, and then keeps the great conversations and nerdiness going.
Thank you. And thank you for listening.
No, I love it.
What does being a nerd mean to you?
So I feel like I've sort of loosely like floated around this in terms of being yourself and pursuing your passions and the things that interest you kind of without fear of judgment or getting cast out. And I recognize now like that's easier to do, I think, as an adult than as a kid or a teenager, when you're constantly surrounded by your peers. There's a lot of like hierarchy going on and people are kind of like always picking on each other. But no, I really think it is just like if you step away from needing that universal approval or validation, you find the people who are sharing your interests and your passions. Like you find your people. And I know that's kind of what happened to me. That's how I found, so many other fellow readers and football fans, Disney fans. Everything is just by being really open about like the things that I love and enjoy doing. And so that's been really good. And it's also like being a nerd can be a way to escape. Like again, with the puzzles, it's so soothing to put a puzzle together and see the pieces fit, because like a lot of times in like the world, the pieces don't fit, or you're not quite sure how they're all going to come together. But like when you have a puzzle, unless there's a missing piece, which is devastating, then like eventually it all comes together, and that's very calming for me, which is actually similar like why I love math, is because every problem has an answer, and there can be different ways to get the answer. Sometimes there are many tears involved and shredded paper in getting to that answer, but you're going to get an answer, and it's like it's very calming. And it grounds me. Same as, just some of these things that I can get very nerdy about or love so much. Like horses, whenever I'm around a horse, I'm in a good mood, or I'm just happier. Like the Budweiser Clydesdales were touring the country and they were going to be like an hour from where I live. So I was like, I got to go see these horses. It was so exciting. I mean, I got to stand next to one for like 2 minutes to get my picture, and I got to pet it, and I was so happy. Like, I was over the moon. And I was telling one of my family members about it, and she was like, "You're driving an hour to go look at a horse?" I'm like, "It's the Budweiser Clydesdales." Like, I was so excited.
You have to do that.
And sorry, I've gone on such a tangent, but it just like that afternoon made me so happy. And so being a nerd is pursuing and finding the things that make you so happy. And if someone's going to judge you for it, that's more a reflection on them. And I also feel like part of being a nerd and being in like a nerdy community is accepting and celebrating the things that other people get really nerdy about. Because like there are things, again, thinking back to being a teacher, I always tried to connect with the kids on whatever I could. And I had a lot of students who were very into cars. I don't know much about cars. If my car runs with no extra lights lit up on the dashboard, that's a win. You know, like I can check tire pressure and do like the basics, but they would get so excited about cars. And sometimes they'd want to talk to me about like parts they'd found at a junkyard and they were working on putting together. And I loved hearing them talk about it because they were so excited. And I can, you know, I'm sure I could think of other examples too, like, you know, people who really nerd out about gardening or, you know, whatever it may be. Like if you can see that excitement and that joy coming from someone else, don't knock that down. Even if you don't understand it, probably like they're thrilled when you ask them about it because then they get to talk about this thing that they really love. And so, yeah, I think being a nerd means not only pursuing and celebrating your passions, but being open to listening to other people's, because also you don't know if that might end up being something that you're really interested in. Like, you know, my friend who years ago recommended A Court of Thorns and Roses. Eventually, I got around to reading it and was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And now it's a big part of my life.
I love that. I love that the answer isn't just about like being a nerd yourself, but embracing the nerdiness in other people as well. So let's get into our geeky recommendations to help people embrace their nerdiness. I have a recommendation. I'm so excited to recommend it. I'll probably recommend it a few more times. But on Netflix, a new show came out called Chaos. It is so good.
I have seen promo for it. I haven't watched it yet, but it looked really good.
I loved it. I'm recommending it to everybody. I binge watched it. I'm not going to give too much away, but it's like a modernized Greek mythology kind of show, but it's so good.
And that works perfectly with your Hercules love.
Oh yeah, yes. I think that's what reminded me of it when I said Hercules earlier, because I don't even come into the show anymore with pre-planned recommendations. I just see what comes to me throughout the show, and I think when I brought up Hercules, I was like, ooh, I should bring up Chaos as a recommendation. So yeah,
I will definitely have to, you know, now that I have like an endorsement for Chaos, other than just seeing it around, I'll have to watch it. I mean, I guess kind of similar to what I said about what being a nerd means, my recommendation is be open to new possibilities. You never know where it might lead. Another thing I cannot escape without recommending a book is The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich. It came out a couple years ago. It is the best book I have read in 2024 so far.
Wow.
The concept is everyone who's an adult, so kids aren't really part of it, gets a box with a string in it. And the string is correlated to the length of their life. So some people have a really long string and some have a short string. And it goes into all these issues, like employers want to start looking at people's strings, thinking like, oh, if someone has a short string, maybe they won't work for me very long, or they'll be kind of reckless. It becomes like a feature on dating apps. Like there's some that are just for the short stringers and just for long strings. So it turns into all these societal issues. Some characters don't look at their strings at all. And it really just is a book about like life is what you make with the time that you have, no matter how much or how little it is. It was beautifully written, amazing book. I hope I didn't give like too much away about it. But if you're looking for a book to read that's just a little different, very unique, I would recommend that one.
That sounds amazing. That's on my list, but I didn't know what it was about. So I'm going to push that up because that's like my vibe right there. I love like weird science fiction-y type things.
If you do read it, please let me know what you think. I would love to hear it.
I will. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was so much fun. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I am at the Menuscript. It's all one word. And again, as if you were typing manuscript, but just replace that A with an E. And you'll see all the books and meals that I am reading and cooking. And then the podcast, again, is the Menuscript. And you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, probably wherever you get your podcasts. And always open to recommendations, or if you want to come on and talk about a book with me, just send me a message. Be happy to set that up. And yeah, look forward to hearing what you think or hearing your book recommendations of things I need to add to my list.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was so much fun. I definitely want to have you back on, but maybe what we could talk about is I'd be so interested in the process of coming up with like your meals for each of the books. Maybe we could get a little deeper into that.
I would love that. Yeah, I really didn't talk about my food nerdiness at all. So that would be super fun.
Yeah, I'd love that. Part 2.
Yes, let's do it.
All right, everybody, thank you all so much for listening. And please be sure that you are following That Nerd Thing in your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode. And please, if you are able to and you haven't already, if you could leave a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, those reviews and those numbers really do help with the algorithm. And if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave some comments. Oh, by the way, Spotify has some new features where you can leave comments on each episode. Feel free to do that, and I try to reply to them all. You can get in touch with me via email at thatnerdthingpod@gmail.com. You can follow the show on social media at thatnerdthingpod. And please be sure to share this show with your nerdy friends, and I'll see you next time. Bye!